are darker than blue. Don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing. They all
Welcome, everyone. This is Darker Than Blue. It is Friday, February 13th, and I am Jackie Lukeman. This is the show, Darker Than Blue, where we talk about politics for the people who you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say are darker than blue. Excuse me. And if you have just listened to our between show announcements, you certainly heard that WPFW's winter drive will be underway at midnight tonight. We have to protect these independent outlets where not only do you receive news that you're not getting from corporate media and the truth, but WPFW is an outlet where the community also has a say in what is broadcast on the air. We listen to you, you listen to us. We have to protect this because we are sharing information that the ruling class does not want you to know. So please prepare next week, or actually starting tonight, prepare yourself to support this valuable, vital resource for the people's information, edification, and empowerment. That is WPFW. The jazz part is fantastic, but the justice part is absolutely necessary too. And we're counting on you, our friends, supporters, and WPF family to keep us going through these really crucial and difficult times. So, we have been talking on this show about Black history during Black History Month that really informs where we are today and explains what is going on that we see that is so troubling and so terrifying today. And as I have been doing, I've just been covering history that has happened the week prior and showing you how these things that have happened in history relate to what is going on today. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get to it. This crusade is much more important than the anti-lynching movement because there would be no lynching if it did not start in the schoolroom. That quote is from Carter G. Woodson, who on February 7th, 1926, initiated the first celebration of Negro History Week, which led to Black History Month to extend and deepen the study and scholarship on African American history. And it is supposed to be all year long, which it's fitting to be on this show right after the end of this month. So no more Black History Month here on Darker Than Blue. It's just history every week, y'all. But Dr. Carter G. Woodson chose February for Negro History Week for reasons of tradition and reform. It's commonly said that Woodson selected February to encompass the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, whose birthdays are the 12th and the 14th of the month, respectively. Though he admired both men, Woodson had actually never been fond of celebrations held in their honor because Woodson believed that history was made by the people, not just by singular great men. So he believed the Black community should focus on the countless Black men and women who contributed to the advance of human civilization. And then in the 1940s, the idea really picked up steam. Efforts began slowly within the Black community to expand the study of Black history in the schools and Black history celebrations before the public. In the South, Black teachers often taught Black history as a supplement to the United States history they were required to teach, which did not include any reference to the achievements that Black people made, with the exception of maybe Crispus Attucks and that page and a half on how happy slaves were. During the Civil Rights Movement in the South, the freedom schools incorporated Black history into their curriculum to advance social change. For freedom schools, for those of you who don't know, were schools that Black organizers set up to teach Black people in addition to the public school education they were getting, which was not great in public schools. We need to do a lot more of that now. The Negro history movement was an intellectual insurgency. That's what this recognition of Black History Week, month, whatever you want to call it, really was. It was a part of a larger effort to transform race relations and the social and political landscape of this country. And it needs to continue to be today, because when we look at this history, it's impossible not to see how the unaddressed crimes against humanity in this nation are being visited upon everyone today, which is why I focus more on the crimes committed against us that have gone unaddressed, that inform what is happening today, than, all the feel good stuff that we like to talk about. Because I think part of the mistake we Africans have made in honoring this history of the accomplishments of our ancestors that white society has absolutely overlooked is that we have not paid as much attention to the crimes they've committed against us that they've gotten away with all this time. Not understanding our enemy is making it difficult for us to fight their continued abuses today, because we are not clear on who our enemy is. So let's try to clear some of that up. On February 7th, 1904, as hundreds of white people watched and cheered, a Black man named Luther Holbert and an unidentified Black woman were tortured and killed in Doddsville, Mississippi. Mr. Holbert was accused of, guess what, shooting and killing James Eastland, a white landowner from a prominent, wealthy local family that owned a plantation where many of the area's Black laborers worked. We talked a little bit about this particular story and Eastland last week, and we have certainly talked about Eastland, the Eastland family, before. Now, after his shooting, Mr. Eastland's two brothers led the posse that captured Holbert and the Black woman. Some news reports identify the woman as Mr. Holbert's wife, but later research suggested that she wasn't, and to this day, we don't know who she really was. Unfortunately, she is an unidentified victim of this racist lynching. But reports of the events precipitating the shooting varied. Some newspapers claimed that Mr. Holbert argued with Mr. Eastland when the white man, Eastland, ordered Holbert to leave the plantation. Other accounts stated that Eastland had attacked Holbert for encouraging other indebted Black workers to flee the slavery-like conditions on the plantation where they were bonded to labor. Still slavery, just by another name. This was sharecropping, folks. Whatever the circumstances of Mr. Eastland's death, the gruesome nature of the fate that befell Mr. Holbert and his woman companion was undisputed. Basically, because Holbert resisted some kind of mistreatment by Eastland. That's why all this happened. He was a Negro who had the nerve to talk back. According to an eyewitness account published in the Evening Post of Vicksburg, Mississippi, Mr. Holbert and the unnamed Black woman were, okay, trigger warning. I'm telling you now, this is horrible. Brace yourself, turn the volume down. This is horrible. They were tied to trees while their funeral pyres were prepared. They were then forced to hold out their hands and watch as their fingers were, I'm not going to say it, but yes, they were, and distributed as souvenirs. Next, the same was done to their ears. Mr. Holbert was then beaten so badly that his skull was fractured and one of his eyes hung by a shred from the socket. The lynch mob next used a large corkscrew to extract flesh from their bodies. And then the victims, after they did not cry out, after all of that, because they were nearly dead, they were thrown on the fire and allowed to burn to death. They were still alive, just barely, and the people knew that, and that is how they took their life. Ultimately, after the torture, the event was described in newspapers as a festive atmosphere in which the audience of 600 spectators enjoyed deviled eggs, lemonade, and whiskey. Soon after, one of James Eastland's brothers, who led the lynch mob, had a son and named the son James. That James Eastland later became Mississippi's longest serving U.S. senator and spent his career championing white supremacy and opposing the civil rights movement and being a close friend and mentor to future President Joseph Robinette Biden. I'm not making that up, dear listeners. Biden has repeatedly bragged himself about his bipartisan and treasured relationship with Republicans in general, and especially James Eastland. Don't be mad at me for reminding you of what he himself said. Ask yourself why you weren't mad at him when Biden told you how much he respected segregationist bigot James Eastland. But more importantly, how many descendants are there of the 600 or more white people who cheered and partied while these two Africans were violently tortured and burned alive? Now ask that question of the 6,599 other lynchings that are documented. How many descendants of those tens of thousands of spectators to those lynchings are alive today? On February 8th, 1946, Timothy Hood removed a Jim Crow sign from a streetcar in Bessemer, Alabama. Yes, that sounds familiar, and it matters to the labor struggles going on there today to relieve congestion on the train. In response to the attempt to ease overcrowding, the conductor of the streetcar rather, shot Timothy Hood, who was an African American veteran of the U.S. Marines. Hood was shot 5 times. He survived only to be arrested and then shot dead by the chief of police in the back of his police car. So that case a few years ago where someone who was detained by local police was said to have shot himself in the back of the police car while he was handcuffed. Yeah, that those kind of lies are not new. The murder of Timothy Hood was ruled justifiable homicide. In a letter to the editor of the Birmingham News dated February 12, 1946, Dr. J. M. Bias, a prominent figure and dentist in the Black community in Birmingham, expressed outrage over the unequal application of the law in the Hood case, calling on the South to, quote, promote equal and exact justice and democracy for all, regardless of race. In this letter he wrote to this newspaper, he said, Dear Sir, courts have been set up in our city and our state to determine those guilty of law breaking and to sentence the guilty to just punishment. Yet, a Negro Marine veteran, Timothy Hood, was not given the opportunity to appear before court. He was shot down in the streets after arrest by an officer of the law, Chief E.B. Fant. They knew who it was. The officer in this case took the rights of the court and the judge into his own hands, that the Jefferson County solicitor and coroner, T.J. McCullum, yep, knew everybody, agreed that this was a case of justifiable homicide, illustrates once more the unequal justice with which Negroes are treated in Alabama. A few days ago, Senator John Bankhead told the nation that the Negro people of the South are content and satisfied with conditions in the South. Can any Negro be content and satisfied when he knows that officers of the law have no more respect for his life than this? It is about time for those who dislike adverse criticism of the South to do something to promote equal and exact justice and democracy for all, regardless of race. The Alabama Veterans Association, formed by members of the SNYC to fight for the rights of Black veterans, pledged to bring the police killers of Timothy Hood to trial. 1,200 members of the NAACP gathered at New Zion Baptist Church to urge the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate the slaying of Timothy Hood. During that mass meeting, the pastor of the church, Reverend R.T. Thomas, demanded that racial discrimination be put to an end and that Black people in the South be granted justice before the law. However, none of that happened. The conductor of the streetcar was never held accountable for Timothy Hood's shooting, and the police chief was never held accountable for his murder. In 1946, Timothy Hood came back to the U.S. from fighting fascism in Europe, only to be murdered by the fascism here that inspired the fascism in Europe. So no, ICE and CBP are not acting like Nazis or the SS. They are acting like Jim Crow America, which was only legally dismantled in 1965 with the Civil Rights Act, which white people did not give a tinker's damn about following. I don't know why people believe that just because a law is passed in this country, white people will automatically follow it because they say they love law and order so much. History shows us that is not true. Because after Jim Crow was supposedly struck down in 1965, on February 8th, 1968, 28 students were injured and 3 were killed, 2 college students and 1 high school student, most shot in the back by the state police while involved in a peaceful protest in Orangeburg, South Carolina. That's right, the Orangeburg Massacre. In 1968, although home to 2 Black colleges and a majority Black population, Orangeburg's economic and political power remained exclusively in the hands of whites. When a Black Vietnam veteran was denied access to a nearby bowling alley, this is after Jim Crow now, after it was supposedly over, one of the last segregated facilities in town, 300 protesters from South Carolina State College and Claflin University converged on the bowling alley in a nonviolent demonstration. The police came along and started fighting with the students, beat 2 female students. The angry students then smashed the windows of white-owned businesses along the route back to campus. The governor sent in the state police and the National Guard. Once again, folks, Black men go overseas to fight this country's battles, in this case, one that it started and had no business being involved in, only to come back here to be denied the right to equal protection, treatment, and access under the law. Good enough to be cannon fodder and foot soldiers for imperialism abroad, but never good enough to have full citizenship, human rights and dignity, and certainly not political power here. By the late evening of February 8th, Army tanks and over 100 heavily armed law enforcement officials had cordoned off the campus. 450 more had been stationed downtown. About 200 students were on campus around a bonfire on the SC State's campus, and then a fire truck with armed escort was sent in. Don't college students do bonfires all the doggone time? But I guess when Black students do it, it's a yeah. Without warning, as all of these militarized forces show up on this college campus, they open fire on the students. It lasted less than 10 seconds. When it was over, 28 students lay on State's campus with multiple buckshot wounds. 3 had been killed. Almost all were shot in the back or the side, so they were running away. All of this was done because students were angry that the cops beat up female students and they broke some store windows after a Black veteran was denied entry into a segregated business that was not supposed to be segregated anymore because Jim Crow was supposed to be illegal. They didn't hurt anybody like the female students were hurt. They broke some windows. They didn't steal anything. They broke some windows of white businesses. That's the key. None of the 9 officers charged for their roles in the shooting were convicted of any wrongdoing, but Cleveland Sellers, a young Black man and program director for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, was convicted of rioting for his role in leading the protest. He served 7 months in jail. But he was not pardoned because he actually didn't commit any crime. He was not pardoned until 1993. He was the only person to do any time in relation to the Orangeburg massacre. None of the people who shot, injured, and killed children were held accountable by 24 white South Carolinians who adjudicated 2 trials. Segregation, racial discrimination, denying service to Black people because of their race was supposed to be illegal by this time. Yet, white businesses still practiced racial segregation and discrimination in the South and in a lot of places in the North and the Midwest. And they've never cared about children, y'all, at least not the ones the military shot at Orangeburg. How many of those descendants, how many descendants of those segregationist owners of the stores, the fire department, the police, the National Guard, and the governor's office are still alive today? How many? Speaking of not caring about children, on February 9th, 1960, 4 weeks before the Little Rock Central High School graduation, a bomb exploded at the home of Carlotta Walls. She was the youngest of the 9 Black students known as the Little Rock Nine, who integrated the school in 1957. In September 1957, Arkansas Governor Orval Faubus, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, I don't care, ordered the Arkansas National Guard to prevent the integration of Little Rock's Central High School by barring 9 newly admitted Black students from entering the school building. Children, y'all. In order to compel the school's integration, President Dwight Eisenhower federalized the National Guard and ordered troops to escort the students into the school, but the students were still confronted by angry white crowds of students and adults. That group of Black students came to be known as the Little Rock Nine, and 14-year-old Carlotta Walls was the youngest among them. In response to the admission of the Little Rock Nine, hundreds of white people attacked Black residents and reporters and those 9 children, causing nationally publicized chaos, bedlam, and turmoil. But the media never called it racist, violent terrorism, because that's what it was. But that televised violence did lead a federal court to halt the desegregation efforts. The Supreme Court overturned that decision and ordered immediate integration, but in a move voters later approved in a referendum, voters in the South, in that state, Governor Faubus closed all public high schools in Little Rock, Arkansas for the 1958-1959 school year. The white residents of Little Rock, Arkansas voted to close all public schools rather than allow those 9 Black children to attend one. Carlotta Walls later described the integration experience as painful and recalled that Central High's white students fell into 3 groups: those who tormented her and the other Black students, those who sympathized with them, and those who silently ignored the way they were treated. Now, think of this country's population as divided up like the students at Central High, the way Carlotta Walls described them. What percentage of the country's white population today do you think are in the first and third categories? We mistakenly focus only on the first group, those who actively hate and vote for our continued repression, and sometimes individually violently act against us themselves, knowing they won't be punished or will be punished very lightly because of this country's racist history that I'm telling you about right now. They are dangerous, of course. Of course, they're dangerous. But we ignore the people who close their blinds, close their doors, turn away, and pretend they don't see the violence done to us. I think that's important because I think they are just as dangerous as the lynch mobs and the people who vote for the lynch mobs. Just as dangerous as the cops who shoot blindly into a crowd of students. And if the second group, the sympathizers, don't do more than just sympathize, then guess what? They are dangerous to us too. Despite the open hostility that she encountered, young Carlotta Walls remained at Central High throughout her high school years. On February 9th, 1960, 4 weeks before graduation, a bomb exploded at her home. Carlotta and her mother and her sister were at home, but no one was injured by the blast. So what did the police do? Well, they arrested and beat Carlotta Walls's father in an unsuccessful attempt to coerce a confession because, sure, he'd bomb his own house with his own family inside. Police then arrested two young Black men who they suspected were involved in the incident, Maceo Benz Jr. and Herbert Montz, who were friends of the Walls family. Because, sure, the friends of the family would bomb their house with their friends inside. Carlotta Walls, of course, never believed either man was responsible, but both were convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Because, sure, Black people will lie about their criminal Black friends who commit violent crimes against them to keep them out of prison. No, this makes no doggone sense. It makes no sense, and it never did because racism and racists make no sense. There's no logic in what they believe and how they act. So stop trying to reason with them with logic and morality. They have neither. And of course, the racists were behind the bombing. The massive resistance by the white community, not just a few white politicians, not just the Klan, but the white community, like the violence Carlotta Walls faced, was largely successful in preventing integration of schools, not just in Arkansas, but throughout the South. Every single Black school child in the 5 deep South states, of which there were 1.4 million, attended segregated schools until the fall of 1960. By the start of the 1964-1965 school year, less than 3% of the South's Black children attended school with white students. And in Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Mississippi, and South Carolina, that number remained substantially below 1%. In 1967, the year I was born, 13 years after Brown v. Board of Education, a report by the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights observed that white violence and intimidation against Black people, quote, continues to be a deterrent to school desegregation, end quote. All these young white podcasters like Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes and their Black MAGA Stevens who bellow about Black ignorance and Black disinterest in education, Black underachievement, Black laziness, Black poverty, Black antisocial behavior, wah. They never, ever, ever in their miserable, ignorant, racist lives talk about the unrelenting violence that their grandparents, NIM, carried out against Black children trying to get an equitably funded education. Because let's be clear, our parents and grandparents didn't want to integrate public schools because we wanted to go to school with white kids so bad. Schools needed to be integrated because school funding was controlled by racist white people. And that meant white schools got most, if not all, of the funding and all of the resources, while Black schools got little funding and used outdated and substandard resources and equipment that was passed down from those white schools when they were given more money to buy new and updated materials and equipment. The state, all of them, did not equitably fund separate segregated school systems, and they were never going to. So eliminating the separate and unequal system that segregationists wanted to maintain had to be done. That's why our ancestors wanted to integrate the schools, not because they felt like education from white folks was better or education with white folks was better. And to add to modern insult or yeah, to add modern insult to historical injury. Yep, that's what I want to say. Democrats like Joe Biden and Barack Obama, who continue to tell these evil, racist, despicable lies about Black parents not caring about their children's education, sitting them down in front of the television with cold Popeyes instead of reading to them. Obama said that Black kids can't read or talk properly because Black parents put their kids in front of the record player. Biden said that or passing policies that criminalize mostly Black and poor parents for their children's truancy without finding out if there are issues facing the family that cause it or contribute to it. That was Kamala Harris. They are still trafficking in this racist idea of Black intellectual and educational inferiority that was popularized by the same people who killed our ancestors for wanting to get an equitable and quality education. How many descendants have all of those white students who harassed and attacked the Little Rock Nine and firebombed one of their homes produced? I was born in 1967, so we know that most of them are still alive. Now, we are at just 30 minutes past the hour, so you know what time it is, folks. Let's take a breather and listen to what our engineer extraordinaire has on tap for you, the people, today. Let's go.
WPFW is turning 49 years old, and we're calling on our community. Before our winter drive begins on Valentine's Day, we are working to raise $49,000 in seed money for challenge grants, so every dollar you give goes further. Major donors stepped up this past weekend with $10,000 and powerful ideas. Now we need you to help us close the gap. This is listener-powered radio, truth-telling, community-centered, and independent. Give now at WPFWFM.org and help us rise into our next 49 years. Love, not fear. Still we rise.
Thank you so much. And yes, you can give now. You do not have to wait until you hear me next week. You don't have to wait until tomorrow. You can give right now. If you're listening, if you're watching, give right now. WPFWFM, Cash App with the $ in front, WPFWFM.org online. But then next week, you can call in and you can talk to one of our volunteers who will help you through the process. But yeah, you can give right now. Go right on ahead. Let's keep going with this history. Because on February 10th, 1908, a mob of over 2,000 white people lynched a Black man named Eli Pigott in Brookhaven, Mississippi. Mr. Pigott was accused of, obviously, sexual impropriety with a white woman and was brutally killed before he could be tried in a court of law. On the morning of February 10th, according to news reports, police deputies and armed military guards transported Mr. Pigott from Jackson to Brookhaven to stand trial. Upon arrival in Brookhaven, however, the lynch mob scuffled briefly, and I mean briefly, it wasn't a very intense scuffle at all, with the military guards before seizing Mr. Pigott, kicking and beating him, and then hanging him from a telephone pole less than 100 yards from the Lincoln County Courthouse. The mob then riddled Mr. Pigott's corpse with bullets as it swung from the pole. Widespread stereotypes depicting Black men as dangerous, violent, and uncontrollable sexual aggressors led to a racialized state of hypervigilance in which any action by a Black man that could be interpreted as seeking or desiring contact with a white woman could result in mob violence. At the peak of racial terror lynchings in this country, it wasn't uncommon for lynch mobs to seize their victims from jails, prisons, courtrooms, or out of the hands of guards, like in this case. So if you are shocked that ICE and CBP are going to immigration hearings and yanking people out of it, that's what they do. That's what they've always done. They don't care. Though police and other officials were armed and charged with protecting the men and women in their custody, they almost never used force to resist white lynch mobs intent on killing Black people. In some cases, and you know this is true, police officials were even found to be complicit or active participants in lynching. This is why the slogans on today's police cars mean nothing. We know they're lies. The police have never protected or served us. Never. And they still do not. After this lynching, press reports focused on the minor injuries sustained by military officials who, despite failing to protect Mr. Pigott from mob murder, were lauded. They were celebrated for their courage and effort. The governor denounced the mob's actions, but nothing was done to bring them to justice. Though the lynching took place in broad daylight with officers of the court present, the judge, and this is what this means, the judge who was supposed to preside over the trial witnessed his death, and some of the white men who were scheduled to serve on the jury participated in the lynching. But none of those people were ever held accountable for the murder of Eli Pigott. Because we've been telling you that the system is full of people who are fine with killing us. It always has been, and it still is. This history informs us that today's continual and repeated refusal to punish law enforcement for violence against African, indigenous, immigrants, and as you can see, even white allies, and law enforcement, legislative, and media entities that downplay that violence and hold the perpetrators of it up as victims and heroes and demonize the civilian injured or dead as probably deserving their fate. That's always been the norm in this country. The only reason people are shocked at what is happening now is that they didn't care to learn that this has always happened to us because it was their ancestors who did the things I'm telling you about now. Yeah. How many descendants did the 2,000 white people in the lynch mob, the police, the judge, the governor, and the media produce? How many of those folks are alive today? And here's a new question for you. What are their professions in society now? What do they do? How many people do they have access to? What do they control? On February 10th, 1780, Paul Cuffey, his brother John, and 5 other Black men petitioned the Massachusetts government to either give African and Native Americans the right to vote or quit taxing them. The Cuffeys had been born free in New England to a woman of the Wampanoag tribe in Massachusetts and a man of the Asante Empire in West Africa. Okay, so sure, some of us today can probably trace some of our lineage to indigenous tribe. Not a lot, but a few. But also, we all trace our lineage from the west coast of Africa, like the father of the Cuffeys did, who was kidnapped into the Atlantic slave trade in his youth and brought to Rhode Island, where he eventually gained freedom. Now, Paul became a whaling captain and a merchant who, in the Revolutionary War, slid past a British blockade in a sailboat to deliver supplies to people off the Massachusetts coast. Now, I didn't know that about Paul Cuffey until right now, until I, prepared these notes. But as the war dragged on, Paul went from farming went into farming with his brother John and wrote this petition to either give us the right to vote or stop demanding taxes for us, after a tax collector demand they pay their district taxes. The Cuffeys refused. And they refused because they said, quote, no vote or influence in the election of those that tax us. In other words, no taxation without representation. Shout out to Washington, D.C., still having that fight. The legislature rejected their petition. Of course they did, but soon after carved out voting rights for men of means, men with money and land, basically, or one or the other, money or land, regardless of race, into the state constitution. Now, this looks like a victory. But it's really a watered down compromise because all men were not given the right to vote, not even all free black men, just all men who have either money or land. So this is a lesson in the limits of reform, but also it's a lesson in why the state loves reform. Whenever the state compromises and says it will do some of what we want, what they end up doing will always benefit those with means over the rest of us working class and poor masses, as this compromise on voting rights that was supposed to be for all free men, but was only ended up being granted to just the rich ones. That's what this history shows. So a decade later, Paul would again lead a fight for racial justice by founding one of the first integrated schools in the United States on his own land. Reform also always leaves you farther away from true liberation and egalitarianism than you realize, forcing you to end up doing more work down the line to address the issues ignored by the reform in the first place. This is why I don't like it. Yeah. And then also, that's why reform is not going to fix this. On February 11th, 1826, a white man named Alfred Moore of Hertford, North Carolina, offered a $20 reward to any white person who captured Joe, an enslaved man, and return him or secure him in the jail so that I can get to him. That's what his little advertisement said. Mr. Moore, an enslaver, obviously, did not believe that Joe intended to escape slavery. This is what he wrote in his reward poster. He said that Joe was, quote, probably lurking in Pasquotank County where his wife was enslaved. So let's be clear here. The man who owned Joe didn't think he was trying to escape. He knew he was trying to visit his wife, who was sold away from him to another plantation. And his answer was not to bring the man's wife back to him, not to allow Joe to visit his wife, and certainly not to free Joe so that he could be with his wife and encourage the person who owned Joe's wife, who he sold Joe's wife to do the same. Nope. Nope. Instead of addressing the material needs of Joe to be with his wife, so much, he loved his wife so much that he risked his own life just to see her. The slave owner's answer was to criminalize Joe and reward regular old white people for chasing that man down and dragging him back to either the plantation or jail, where his wife was not. The institution of slavery reduced enslaved black men, women, and children to commodities, to things, denying their humanity and familial status as children, siblings, spouses, or even parents. Black families were regularly separated at the whim of an enslaver or an auctioneer, never to see each other again. This was one of the most traumatizing features of enslavement. And most enslaved people were sold without a single other family member. It is estimated that more than half of all enslaved people held in the Upper South were separated from a parent or a child through sale, and a third of all marriages between enslaved people were destroyed by human trafficking. Press accounts have documented the heartbreaking stories of enslaved mothers who jumped from buildings and enslaved fathers who slit their throats rather than to be separated from their families. Enslaved people frequently suffered extreme physical violence as punishment for or warning against transgressions like running away, visiting a spouse, or trying to prevent the sale of their beloveds. These basic human instincts resulted in torturous whippings or extreme punishments. White men and women justified this cruelty by claiming that black people didn't have emotional ties to each other, not like they did to their people. However, For years after the 1865 passage of the 13th Amendment that ended chattel slavery in the U.S., our people throughout the country placed advertisements wherever we could, in church bulletins, local newspapers, posted them up on lampposts, wherever, trying to reconnect with parents, children, spouses, and friends who they'd been separated from by sale during enslavement, some of whom they had not seen in decades. And many of our people never reconnected with their families who were taken from them. The historical record does not reveal whether this Black man, identified only as Joe in the reward poster, was ever captured and returned to Alfred Moore, reunited with his wife, or able to reach freedom. Nearly 40 years before the end of the Civil War, Joe was one of countless Black people enslaved in the U.S. who dared to love and to seek freedom. What an incredible, incredible sentiment on the day of Black love. In a time when the laws of this nation denied Black people even those most basic human rights to love someone else. But politicians in both parties today, pundits, strategists, podcasters, and regular old people, believe the racist lies about Black people. They believe the lies told about our ancestors to perpetuate this horrific violence that dismantled the family, communal, societal, and governance structures that we had in Africa, and to ensure we could never maintain any semblance of a stable family or community here, because they always saw us as things that they could profit off of and then a potential threat to them, when all we wanted was to be left alone to live in peace. But we were not allowed to do that because their comfort and profit was built on our degradation. They had to justify it somehow, and making us subhuman and barely above animals with no human emotion they needed to respect was how they did it. And many still do. And this is just one story. How many more stories like this exist? We will never know for sure. But we do know that at the start of the Civil War in 1861, there were about 4.5 million Black people in the U.S. Of that number, only about 500,000 were free, or more specifically, not enslaved, because even they were not really free, as in equal in society. The rest of the 4 million descendants of West Africans were enslaved. So, how many of the 4 million Africans, Black people, do you think this kind of thing was done to? And how many white people do you think collected those rewards for hunting down and returning those grieving people to the concentration camps that separated and destroyed their families? I hope this clarifies why so many people today do not care that they are watching families being separated in this country on video right now, that they have watched families being blown to bits and evaporated, hostages being systematically raped, and a Zionist society that demands and celebrates the right to rape Palestinians in their concentration camps in Gaza. They have ignored families being destroyed, women being systematically raped, and children being forced to work in mines for the materials needed for these computers we rely on under slavery-like conditions, with no concern for any of that suffering in the Congo. Their ancestors didn't care about our families and children, and they don't care about anybody else's families and children today. It is a long, unbroken tradition. On February 12th, 1900, Lift Every Voice and Sing was first publicly performed by 500 school children at the Stanton School in Jackson, Florida, as part of a celebration of Abraham Lincoln's birthday. The school principal, James Weldon Johnson, wrote the words, and Johnson's brother, Rosamond, set them to music. The children continued to sing the song, popularizing it for generations to come. Later, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People adopted the song as the Black National Anthem. And people really lose their mind about the song. They hate it because they don't understand why we blacks need our own anthem, because we should just be happy with the one that they don't sing that third stanza of because it's racist. But just like everything else around us, they don't want to know what the song means or why it was written. And unfortunately, a lot of us don't either. In the song, in calling for earth and heaven to ring with the harmonies of liberty, these lyrics speak out against racism and Jim Crow laws, especially against the lynchings that occurred along with the rise of the Klan at the turn of the century. Yes, y'all, Lift Every Voice and Sing is an anti lynching song. And white people in this country do not want to talk about lynching because who did the lynching? They know the answer and do not want to be confronted with it. So keep singing the song. By 1920s, copies of Lift Every Voice and Sing could be found in black churches across the country, often just kind of pasted into the front inside covers of hymnals. Sadly, today, too many churches that do still have the song in their hymnals do not know that it is not just a song about black freedom, but another challenge to lynching raised up through poetry and song. Too few of us today understand this song's importance. So we don't see how relevant it is to our ongoing struggles. We think it's campy and goofy. Our ongoing struggles, though, are absolutely connected to the refrains in this song, such as the continued struggle against police brutalization of our people that are as critical today as what was going on February 12th, 1946, when Sergeant Isaac Woodard, a Black World War II veteran, boarded a Greyhound bus in Georgia heading home to his wife in North Carolina. He had been honorably discharged from service just hours earlier. Hours. When the bus stopped outside of Augusta, South Carolina, Sergeant Woodard, who was still in uniform, asked the driver if there was time to use the restroom. He just needed to go to the bathroom. The driver cursed at him and kept on driving. Sergeant Woodard said to the driver, "You gonna talk to me like I'm talking to you." And then Sergeant Woodard said, "I am a man just like you." He's in uniform, remember, just came from serving in World War II. After a brief argument, Sergeant Woodard returned to his seat. At the next stop in Batesburg, South Carolina, the bus driver left the bus, called Linwood Shull, the police chief. Gee, how did the white bus driver know the police chief in that little old town, who arrived soon after he was called? Officer Shull removed Sergeant Woodard, still in uniform, from the bus and began brutally beating him with a blackjack right outside of the bus in his uniform. Sergeant Woodard, who was unconscious, badly injured, was then left in Batesburg jail overnight. The next morning, the city court fined him for disorderly conduct, just like Rodney King was fighting the police like a crazed animal, only he wasn't. Just like Sandra Bland was threatening a cop, only she wasn't. Just like Breonna Taylor shot at the cops from her bedroom, only she didn't. Just like Tamir Rice was waving a gun around, only he wasn't. Just like Ahmaud Arbery was trying to break into people's houses, only he wasn't. Just like Khalif Browder stole that backpack, only he didn't. Just like Marimar Martinez was trying to ram ICE vehicles or box them in, only she wasn't. Just like Rachel Good was trying to run that ICE agent over with her car, only she wasn't. Just like Alex Pretty was waving a gun at ICE agents, only he wasn't. Sergeant Woodard was not guilty of any crime, but he was brutally beaten and thrown in jail and charged with a crime anyway. Law enforcement and the legal system will easily lie about the victims of police abuse, and it has always been true, And it is consistently seen throughout history that people don't want to deal with because they don't want to confront this truth. And as I just showed you, not just with Black people, but too many people in this country have continued to die at the hands of so called law enforcement because too many folks blindly back the blue and ignore that their hands are covered in our blood. When Sergeant Woodard was finally transferred to a VA hospital in Columbia, South Carolina, doctors determined that the beating and delay in medical treatment had permanently blinded him. In October 1946, President Harry Truman ordered his attorney general to bring federal charges against Chief Shull. The trial began a month later and was presided over by Judge J. Watties Waring, whose father was a Confederate soldier. After deliberating for less than 20 minutes, the all-white jury, you're not surprised, acquitted Officer Shull. And this is why I maintain and will forever insist that the collusion between Southern and Northern whites to reconcile with each other and not prosecute and severely punish the Confederacy and its agents and adherents and supporters is a large part of why this country has seen so little real progress in regard to equality and justice in every aspect. The Confederates have maintained power all this time, but they've been allowed to maintain power after starting a war to keep our ancestors enslaved. They got rewarded. We still get told to get over all of that, and you should stop letting them do that. Do you want to know how many of today's politicians in U.S. government alone have slave-holding ancestors like that judge in this case? A 2023 Reuters investigation found that at least 100 members of the 117th Congress back then, just 3 years ago, along with President Joe Biden, most living former presidents, and several Supreme Court justices and governors are direct descendants of ancestors who enslaved Black people. This includes 28 senators and both Democrats and Republicans. And of course, this is where we need to ask, dear listeners, where are the rest of the white politicians and their answers? Where were their ancestors during all of these lynchings? So listen, this history is critically important for us to understand where we are right now. Studying this history is not just an exercise in going over the past, it explains the future. This is why we're going to do this some more next week, even as we are in the midst of our winter fund drive. So thank you so much for watching, listening. Hope to see you next week. Until then, a luta continua, the struggle continues. But if we study history and apply the lessons to today to our actions, Victoria Asserta, victory is certain. Peace until next time.